Well, Debbie, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. I've done many interesting things in my life in academia, but it was beyond my wildest dreams that I would ever be the main turn at the Conference of Research Librarians. So I'm delighted to be here and very honoured to be asked to speak to you. I'm going to talk to you about this report, which is called, not the Finch report, but Accessibility, Sustainability and Excellence. Though picking up on what Debbie has said, it has had a very surreal aspect to it as far as I am concerned. I've certainly never been in the position before where my name has been so deeply associated with some particular report of this sort. So I find myself, as I say, in a rather surreal position where in 2 weeks' time I'm chairing a conference called Implementing Finch. That's not the worst of it. I'm collecting these. This next one, my family's a bit worried about, actually. But my favourite one is the next one, which was only rather briefly on the website of the Times Higher Education Supplement just after the government had announced that it agreed with our recommendations. And it says, government acts to make Finch... It's great, isn't it? However, none of that is relevant to today. That's what it's called, Accessibility, Sustainability and Excellence, How to Expand Access to Published Research Findings. I'm going to talk to you about an overview of the report, how we came to the conclusions that we came to, and then a few amateur thoughts at the end about the implications for libraries. So the remit of the working group was actually very specific. So we've been criticised for not doing all sorts of things that we weren't actually asked to do. What we were asked to do was to focus on the peer-reviewed published outcomes of research. So only that, not about anything else that comes out of research, and how to make the peer-reviewed published outcomes more accessible to more people and organisations who might be able to make use of them, straight away, free, and with the ability to reuse the material. That was what the remit was. That was expressed in more formal terms of reference, of course. And of course, we needed to be able to try and recommend how you could do that whilst avoiding the various pitfalls. Now, there are lots of pitfalls, but here are some of the important ones, not all of them. There's the potential for recommendations related to this to damage various different things that must not be damaged. To damage the standards of peer review, we must maintain high standards of peer review, whatever we do. To damage the quality of UK research by dissipating the type of publication into less valuable ones. To damage the commercial publishing industry and learned societies in their roles as publishers. And I'm sure that I know there are other pitfalls as well. So we had to be able to avoid those pitfalls while fulfilling our remit. Let me start with the recommendations. These are the main recommendations. We did not say we should move to gold open access immediately. We absolutely didn't say that. Our first recommendation was that we should expect that there would be a mixed economy in publishing for the foreseeable future. And that means that two forms of publishing will coexist for a period of time. That is the subscription-based publishing and open access author payments publishing. But we believed that, and I will come to why we said this in a moment, that the policy direction should be towards open access. And the report also then set out what actions were needed to accomplish that and made an estimate, and it is only an estimate, of the costs of the transitional period. So we did this through a working group. We were commissioned by government, but specifically to be independent, and I can honestly say that we weren't taking instructions from ministers at all on this. We were independent of them, and we were extraordinarily lucky in being able to persuade very senior representatives of all the key parties to serve on the working group, and that includes RLUK, where Phil Sykes, I must say, was the most incredibly valuable member. of the working group, and we couldn't have got where we are without Phil and others like him, who were able to speak for their constituencies, and we tried to support that through asking them to regularly refer back to constituencies, be completely open about the way our thinking was moving, get feedback and let us know, so that we were testing out all the time what the conclusions were likely to be, what the direction of travel was. Phil was also incredibly useful in giving me a tutorial, and I must thank both him and my former colleague from Keele, Paul Reynolds, who's also here, because I grabbed each of them for a long tutorial session on open access publishing, about which I really knew very little before I started. I came to this completely fresh, apart from having been an academic and a vice-chancellor, but it wasn't a subject that I really knew much about. I had no specific opinions about what the direction of travel should be, and so I really did need to learn a lot very quickly. I think the way in which we worked is probably one of the keys to what's happened, how the kind of report that we came out with and what's happened since. We very quickly were able to agree that that there are genuinely different interests in this world, the different stakeholder groups, that they are not easy to reconcile, and that whatever we came out with, we were looking for a best fit solution, and we're not expecting to produce a solution that everybody was delighted with. In fact, I didn't expect that anybody would be absolutely delighted with the solution, but what we were aiming for was something that everybody could live with. And in order to try to get towards a best fit solution, we developed some success criteria, which I'll say something about in a moment. Now, first of all, about the drivers for change here. I don't need to spend much time on this with this particular audience, but just to remind it. We believe by the end of the process that change in the way in which publishing operates, academic publishing operates, is absolutely inevitable, even if we did nothing. And therefore, it's better not to do nothing. It's better to recognise that change is inevitable, to embrace the change and try to manage it. Why is it inevitable? Well, there are a range of reasons why it's inevitable. There's the moral and political case about making, and this is what government is particularly signed up to, the need to make publicly available, free and quickly, material which is built on research which the taxpayer has funded. There's the whole business of the academic publishing arena lagging behind other aspects of the information and communications environment, where the internet has just changed absolutely everything. And we all expect in other aspects of our lives to be able to get access to information very rapidly when we want it, manipulate it, not to have to pay for it unless there's some very special reason for that, commercial reasons. And the academic publishing industry can't just stay out of that process forever. The whole information and communications environment, I'll say something about in a moment, and the digital revolution in research publishing. There's the cost pressures of the existing system and international momentum for change. And for all these reasons, there are drivers for change which we can't ignore. Thought I'd say just pick out one or two of those. The digital revolution in publishing, I don't know why I'm telling you this, you know much more about it than I do. But the way in which the publishing revolution has impacted on academic publishing has a very old-fashioned feel to it if you start thinking about it this way. Academics use online journals because practically everything is online now, but the use mirrors the printed page. You know, you read it on the screen, you print it off, you scribble on the printed version or whatever, in many cases. And what we don't have is the ability, in most cases, to navigate quickly, to make use of interactive tools, to combine material from different articles, to reuse the information, and so on. And there's quite a significant restriction at the present time on licenses permitting reuse. The cost pressures in the existing system are even better known to you than they are to me, but this says to me, if you put all this together, the rise in journal subscriptions, the bundling of journals, the effect that that has on purchasing of books, the increase in the number of journals, the whole way in which academics are not sure what they should be doing in relation to all of this. This says to me that this is a situation that's not sustainable in the longer term and some change needs to happen. However, finding the right solution was never going to be easy. And it's not easy because different parties have different sets of interests, as I've said. So this is just a pen portrait of this, but broadly, universities as institutions want to maximise their research performance through publication, but also to control costs. Researchers also want to maximise their own personal research performance by publishing in the best journals, but are not too bothered about cost on the whole. Research funders are interested in cost, but also are interested in the impact of the research that they fund. Libraries interested in costs too, but wanting to maximise services to readers in a variety of ways. And publishers, of course, also maintaining high quality services in most cases, but also needing to not only cover the costs of doing that, but also securing profitability. So when you put all that together, you're never going to come out with a solution that everybody's delighted with, as I've already said. So what does success look like? Well, in broad terms, these were the success criteria that we set for the exercise. That if we were successful, this is what the world would look like. More people would get quicker and better access to the published outcomes of global research, not only research published in the UK and by UK authors. It would be a situation where there was financial stability for publishers, including learned societies, although financial stability doesn't mean that nothing changes, but it means that there is a viable publishing industry. It would be affordable for funders, universities and for libraries, and high quality research would be maintained, which includes high quality services to researchers and authors. Now, how can we do this? Well, obviously, we looked at whether it could be done by adapting the subscription model. And what you would need to do to adapt the subscription model to get nearer to these success criteria, to get nearer to those criteria, you would have to adapt, you can adapt the subscription model so that you would need to limit restrictions on access to a minimum. So that's embargoes, really. So making sure that embargoes are as short as they possibly can be. You increase the use of repositories, by which I mean that what you know about repositories, archiving often pre-publication versions for immediate access. And you would extend the licenses which cover subscription journals to cover more journals with more libraries involved in it. These are the sorts of things you need to do in order to make the subscription model work more closely to the success criteria that we set. And we do think actually each of those is quite an important move, but together, even together, they don't actually fulfill our success criteria. And they don't because the business model can't really be made to work if you really want the sort of success criteria that we set. So in the subscription model, the business model of the subscription model of publishing means that the costs are covered by the reader or on behalf of the reader. And that is done by journals being published at the end of the publication process. And if you do that, then the business model requires there to be restrictions on access, who can access it, when they can access it, and what they can do with it in order to sustain the business model. And you can't go much further than we are now. Probably it can go a bit further, certainly, but not very much further with the subscription model. And you don't get to the point you want to be if what you want is the sort of open access environment that or expanded access environment that we were trying to imagine. So the only way of doing this is to have a different business model. And this is why we ended up by saying that although we think that both should live side by side for a period of time, the open access model is the one which can deliver on the success criteria. And this is because it turns the business model on its head, and the costs are actually recovered at the beginning of the publication process, not at the end. And that means that the costs are paid by the author or on behalf of the author in order to get to that stage. So the restrictions on when you can read it, who can read it, and what they can do with it, that problem basically goes away with a different business model, which is why we ended up by saying that the policy direction should be in this way. So adopting the open access model gives us the best fit with our success criteria. We think it's feasible. At the moment, I understand about 10% of articles worldwide are published through this model, but it is changing fast, and this is a fast-growing area of publishing with different types of experimentation going on, of different sorts of publishing models within this environment. We obviously benefited hugely from the fact that the Wellcome Trust has, since 2007, been adopting a policy quite similar to the one which we're recommending, not exactly the same. But we know we could see that there was a worked example, so to speak, which was actually working. We believe that this model will actually encourage all sorts and should encourage all sorts of innovation in publishing. Different sorts of open access model. PLOS One is something that most of you will know about. That's one sort of open access model, which is a bit different from the conventional one. We believe that there's the can and should be the development of a whole range of intermediary tools for navigation and discovery, and for combining of material, where that's going to be done in ways which we can't exactly imagine at the present time, but with lots of opportunities there for all sorts of groups. We believe that groups of academics will themselves want to get together and find ways of making use of this new environment. It's actually in some ways less restrictive for new entrants. The costs of entry are probably not as high as they are for a subscription journal. And a whole lot of other innovations which we are not yet able to imagine. So we think that the open access model not only is the best fit with our success criteria, but also will free up the publishing environment for more experimentation, which would be a very good thing. But it does have to be introduced gradually. You can't do it straight away for a lot of reasons, not least because it would destabilize the system to do it straight, to just sort of immediately try and flick a switch. In order to implement the open access model, a number of key things have to happen. If these aren't happening, then, well, if these had not started to happen, because they have, then our report would just sit on the shelf and be a jolly nice report. So this is what needs to happen in order to get things moving. The research funders have to accept that publication is part of research costs and to pay those costs in appropriate ways, and back that up by requiring publication in either only in an open access format with author pays, or in that as one clear option which is supported. Universities need to be able to support this. This is a big change for universities. I don't underestimate that. And the only way that universities are going to be able to manage this is to establish publication funds and develop ways of paying authors' costs. Universities will do this in different ways, I don't doubt. I'm sure that good practice will emerge, people will share their experiences, and we will see patterns emerging of how universities do this. But this has to be done. It can only be the only way in which universities can support the payment of author payment charges. And of course, universities need to work together to negotiate what the charges will be. It's very important that that happens, because we don't want to have a divide and rule situation where each individual university, or even worse, each individual author, is negotiating their own charges. That way lies madness and a great amount of money wasted in transactional costs. Publishers, of course, have to rise to the occasion as well. It's not a comfortable situation for them. I really am sure that's true. They need to think how they are going to respond to this. There quite clearly needs to be the development of more open access publications, and they need to be geared up to negotiate author payment charges in a way which is realistic and which relates them to the cost of subscriptions. In relation to transitional arrangements, we said that the policy direction should be towards open access, and that that means that the funders have to set requirements, which you're going to hear from Mark Thorley in a moment about RCUK, so I won't labour this point at all. But we also believe that in order to really maximise on the situation, then there needs to be the negotiation of extended licences for subscription journals, because after all, our UK research funders can only directly affect work that they fund. And at the moment, about 6%, 6 or 7% of publications worldwide are by UK authors, and the rest are not by UK authors, and we can't directly influence what they do. So for a significant period of time, until the rest of the world moves in an equivalent direction, then we need to try and maximise on the access to the subscription journals, and we believe that that can be done through extended licences. We also think there should be much improved use of repositories, and some of the cost estimates that we did were for some additional investment in repositories. And we believe that the better coordination, better navigation tools, interoperability of repositories is an important part of this mixed economy picture in the short to medium term. Why do we need a transitional period? I've been criticised for saying we'll have a sort of reasonably lengthy transitional period. Some people think that we should move much more rapidly. But there are a number of reasons for this. I've already mentioned that we can only influence directly UK authors, and we'll still go on needing to buy subscriptions. It's also the case that the speed of change will vary by discipline. As things stand at the moment, the life of medical sciences are way ahead in terms of the proportion of articles already published in open access format. And then there's a sort of whole spectrum there, with probably the humanities with the least at the moment, but again it varies to some extent within subdisciplines. Learned societies, that particular category of publishers, particularly need time to adapt. They have a specific set of issues, which the working group had a number of learned societies represented in its membership. We're very sympathetic to that, but they can't hold themselves completely separate from this world and the way in which publishing is moving, but they do need time to adapt to it. And of course, both funders and universities have to adjust their processes. We did try to estimate the transitional costs. It is very difficult because the assumptions that you make about this depend entirely, really, on how quickly the rest of the world moves and precisely what direction they move in. So, there is definitely a health warning here, but this was our best estimate, a total of about between 50 and 60 million a year in the transitional period, of which about 38 million is to support article processing charges for author payments, and the rest of it is for development of more extended licenses and repositories. It's a small fraction of the research budget, but this is Mark's area, not mine, so I'll move rapidly on. Since publication, I am delighted to say that the government accepted all our recommendations and found £10 million to pump prime the implementation, particularly for infrastructure. And of course, both RCUK and HEFC have announced policy in line with the report. And finally, and slightly nervously, I thought I'd better say something in my final slide about libraries. Well, these are my initial thoughts, but you'll have lots more. So libraries, I think, collectively and individually, will need to get involved in all these things. So extended licensing arrangements. The aspiration of my working group is that there should be extended licenses for more, so that more publications, more journal publications become accessible and to whoever wants to see them, and that a wider range of organisations and individuals will have access to those publications through university libraries. There is, of course, the publishers came up with an offer in the course of our working group, which was very welcome, which was that they would experiment with walk-in access to public libraries, making their journals free inside a public library, and that could potentially have a very important impact. Libraries will, I'm sure, be very much at the heart of negotiating not only the costs of subscriptions, which you already do, but the costs of APCs in the future. And these two must be seen in parallel, because the whole point about saying that there are transitional costs is that in the transitional period, we're paying for author payments, the author payment stream, but we're also still paying for a significant amount of subscriptions. But we need to make sure that the balance swings progressively. As there are more, as more money is invested in author payments, we need to be investing less in subscriptions. So the negotiations about this need to encompass both. Excuse me. Libraries will also, I'm quite certain, be the places within universities where expertise is developed to support the expansion of open access. Advice to academics, advice to university research offices, advice to university management about what charges should be paid, what journals are journals that should be supported through this route. A whole range of things there which really only libraries and librarians are going to be able to develop expertise on. And of course, libraries will have to adapt to the shifts in internal funding flows, because if you take the absolutely simplest situation, which is, probably never quite going to happen, but the simplest situation is where you have no subscriptions and all the funding for publication goes through the author payments route. You might, for the university, that could be cost neutral. I would hope that it would be. But for the library, you're sitting in a different place, because whereas previously you were paying the cost of subscriptions through the library budget, you're now managing, or maybe not managing directly, or in some ways involved in the payment of author payment charges, but the funding flows differently around the university. So whereas it flowed to libraries for subscription budgets, it's now going to flow to some other public university publication fund to pay for author payments. And libraries are going to have to just adjust to those internal funding flows, which is absolutely not to say they become less important. I don't think that's true at all, but it is different.